Okay, everybody, this is going to be part 6 of U.S. history from 1861 to 1884, a brief review. We already covered, up to this point, we covered from the founding of our nation and the War of Independence forward to the point of that of in the last video. We touched on some points, then we did some refreshers, which we're going to do real quick here. I'm going to take a quick look. We left off with looking at the forming of the Confederacy, which was founded by the Democratic Party, which the Democratic Party was established by the British Tory in 1828. And then by 1861, they had formed the Confederate slave states, and where the Democrats were a pro-slavery party attempting to fight for slave owners' rights and the right to expand slavery in the United States. Their Confederate flag, which we touched on last time, actually represents a British loyalty flag, nothing to do with America whatsoever, and we're just going to go over a brief of it. During the time with the start of the Civil War, we had Cassius Marcellus Clay, who was a diplomat to Russia at the time, of which some of these things we'll catch up on. These are important facts of history I want people to be aware of. Cassius Marcellus Clay, which you can read up, but we'll put links to all these things here. He was a great abolitionist out of Kentucky. But the main point is about how when he was a diplomat to Russia, and here I got a little story about how Russia guaranteed a Union victory in the Civil War. Most people, like I said, when we look back at the fact of that the Confederacy was actually formed, the Democratic Party was formed by the British loyalists. They had a loyalty to Great Britain. They were never a part of America. They never agreed with the centralized Constitution of America or the forming of a centralized government of America. They always remained loyal to Great Britain. During the Civil War, they sought to reach out to Great Britain for an alliance with them. They wanted Great Britain to assist them in overthrowing the United States of America, the Republic, Constitutional Republic. The Confederate flag represented to Great Britain and as well France even, because they had the loyalty of the Tories in France. They had French Tories as well. And this was to signal to them that the Tory were still loyal to Great Britain in the hopes that they would come in and ally them. Most people think it's a battle flag, but as you can see here, this was designed by Nicholas Marchel, who was a German artist. We spoke about this in the last videos. It was adapted in 1863 as the first national, up here is the first national or second national flag of the Democratic Party's Confederate States. Down here with the red was the third national Confederate flag. And I'll put a link to these so these people can see it. What you're seeing in a bigger picture here with the stars and the bars, that was a flag of which there's letters in the archives that clearly made clear that the Confederacy and the Democrats didn't want any kind of a flag that represented that of America. They wanted what we know to be now the Confederate flag, which they were clearly sure represented their loyalty to Great Britain. And as we say, Marcellus Cassius Clay was a diplomat to Great Britain, appointed by Abraham Lincoln. And with that negotiations, it was Russia. I'm sorry, he was a diplomat to Russia. I'm losing my mind there. Cassius Marcellus Clay was a diplomat to Russia, and appointed by Abraham Lincoln. And with negotiations with Russia, when it was heard that Great Britain and France may align with the Confederacy and the Democrats, Russia informed them and as well sent in ships to aid and assist the Unionists of the Constitutional Free Republic of the United States. This alliance between the United States and Russia is what prevented Great Britain from coming in and aiding the Democrats in the Civil War of 1861. So that alliance, I just want people to understand. We'll include links to this so you can read about that more in depth. We want to touch on, too, the truth about the Democratic Party and the Southern view of Southern Americans. Today we have a lot of history that lies about the truth of our history. When we get forward up into the 1900s, early 1900s, with Woodrow Wilson, we'll understand where all those lies start to get created under Democratic Woodrow Wilson from 1914 forward up to, or actually 1912 to 1921, where he creates the propaganda of all the lies that are misleading people today. But in truth, the southern parts of the United States that had true Southern Republic Americans, if you want to know what the South Democrats of the Confederacy did to Southern Americans, you can look up the Great Hanging at Gainesville. And this is in Gainesville, Texas, not Florida. And where they hung near 50 Southern Americans who are loyal to the Constitutional Republic of the United States of America. this was how they exemplified to the Southern Americans, don't be loyal to the Union, or if you are, keep your mouth shut, otherwise you get hung, your families will be burned alive in their homes as we burn them down, because that's what they did. There was no love of the Democratic Confederacy for the Southern American or Northern American or any American. Like I said, they were British loyalists. They, by threats of terrorism and things as such like hangings, mass hangings, is how they persuaded the Southern American to vote Democrat and as well participate and keep their mouth shut in any kind of support for the Constitutional Republic of the United States. Was through terroristic threats. So what they still use to this very day, which as we progress through time, you're going to realize this never changed with the Democrats. Another thing I want to touch on that took place following the result of the Civil War, and then after, actually we should move this up forward here a ways, and we'll get back to that. We'll go here. Yeah, I'm going to move that forward as well. Okay, so we'll go here. Now, I just want to touch on the events of one thing here, a speech writing. This was the House Divided speech by Abraham Lincoln. This is important. This was done in 1858, three years before the Civil War actually broke out, and he made a statement of that a house divided against itself can't stand. This is important because this is about where we're going to pick up as we move into history going forward here. We have the final resolve of the ending of the Civil War. The Republicans of the Constitutional Republic of the United States of America won the Civil War. General Lee was the first to start surrendering, followed by that of a trend of other generals surrendering. There's a lot more details to that, of which we're going to touch on probably in forward videos where we do specifics about things. Most aren't aware that many, even of those who were fighting in the Civil War for the South, had no understanding of why they were really fighting. Today, a lot of people assume it was like today then, and it wasn't. Communications, they had no phones back then. There was nothing but, if you wanted to communicate with somebody, text back then was write a letter, give it to a guy on a horse, and he rode for weeks or months or even sometimes years to reach the point to where he would give that letter to somebody else. Communications between the North, like Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, Georgia, where the Confederacy had set up its capital under its elected Democratic president, Jefferson Davis. Sometimes if you had Lincoln want to send a letter to Davis, it could take a year to 18 months to get a letter down to him, depending on what time of the year it was, what season, how bad the snow was, how hot it was in the summer, and to how long a man could ride a horse a day with that letter to deliver it to whoever it was coming. So it could take like 18 months to get one message. That's how long short was text back then. Now you want to talk about text. That's back then. It could take a year and a half to get a text through. Okay, if you want to put a young posterity today to understand what I'm saying, they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have text back then. They had no way. You wanted to communicate with somebody who wrote a letter by hand and gave it to somebody they rode on a horse and they delivered it. So that, just so you understand for the youth today. So upon the conclusion of where we're at, upon the conclusion of the Civil War, the Democrats went right ahead in forming what was known as the Ku Klux Klan. This was formed by the Southern Confederate Democratic soldiers of the Confederate Army in 1865. It was a terrorist organization that was going to be established not only to terrorize the now free black Americans, but as well any white Americans who supported them. As we progress forward, you're going to realize that the racial divide issues of black and white is really as well a propagated lie of history. It was never really truly about white or black. It was about inhumanity and humanity. The Republicans of the Constitutional Republic of the Free United States wanted slavery abolished since the United States was founded in 1777. As we mentioned in previous videos, the first state to abolish slavery was Vermont in 1777, which was followed then by the original 13 colonies, up to the progression of where we get to the final settlement of everything in the Civil War, where we abolish it across the entire nation. Understand the areas where slavery was still being practiced and allowed and going on was with that of the states that were under the control of the British Tories, who were the loyalists to Great Britain, who became the Democrats in 1828. They were the pro-slavery. They wanted to keep slavery. After losing the Civil War, they evolved this Ku Klux Klan, which comes from an ancient order out of ancient history, believe it or not, of an order of civil society upsetting terrorist kind of establishment. Upon after that, we get up to here. We have Abraham Lincoln, who was the president, the Republican president of the Civil War time. Some things I want to touch on here is the Wade Davis bill is very important. The Wade Davis bill was a bill that was put up forward and was going to do for Reconstruction, in a sense. What happened with the Wade Davis bill, though, is it got... I think I missed here. Something going on. Okay, Wade Davis bill. Here we go. Pocket veto. I had something about where I thought I had something up for a pocket veto on the Wade Davis bill. But the Wade Davis bill, when it was introduced to Lincoln, he pocket vetoed the Wade Davis bill because he didn't feel it had strong enough language for what he wanted to do to ensure that the Democratic Party would be totally dissolved and not able to stand in the United States. He wanted to make sure that the... I'm trying to see if I have it here. I don't think so, no. Okay, so I lost that. Oh, here it is. Okay. Right here was a section of the Wade Davis bill. It says... Okay, no. First, no person who has held or exercised any office, civil or military, except offices merely ministerial, and military offices below the grade of colonel, state or confederate under the usurping power, shall vote for or be a member of the legislature or governor. Now, Lincoln wanted language that made it clear that no Democrat would be allowed to vote, any loyal Democrat would be allowed to vote in the United States of America, nor hold any government position in the party. He wanted to have it where it was completely dissolved and banned from the United States. This was the language they had in the Wade Davis bill. This right here is the Wade Davis bill. And he didn't feel it was strong enough. It was under Section 8, or 7, 7 paragraph 2. And he didn't feel this language was strong enough to abolish the Democratic Party, and he pocket vetoed it. It's what's called pocket vetoed. The Wade Davis bill, like right here is Lincoln's pocket veto proclamation. And what he had done is gave them an opportunity to amend it and make it stronger. But the sad part about it is, before they got the chance to do that, Lincoln was killed. The Democrats assassinated him. There's a lot of speak about what we look at today in the current time of when I'm doing this in 2020. We have the issue going on with Donald Trump, and we just had a very questionable election happen. During Lincoln's election, the second, we had the very same similar things during Abraham Lincoln's election on the second. Mail-in ballot fraud with the Democrats due to the war. Actually was taking place. It started back then in 1861 with Abraham Lincoln with the Democrats in the corrupt elections. They killed Abraham Lincoln before the Wade Davis bill could be amended, or he could enter any kind of executive order in a way that would guarantee the banning of the Democratic Party. And what I was getting to was the point that during that time you had Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was a known Democrat. He's the father of rhinos. Republican in name only is what rhino stands for. He played the part as to be that of a unionist, but in truth he was a Democrat. And he was an infiltrating Democrat in. And what I'm mentioning about right now with the current election and the election fraud we're facing now with Donald Trump, that's kind of like what Mike Pence was. Mike Pence was a rhino. He was a treasonous traitor who was in the same as what you would have had with Jefferson Davis in the time with Abraham Lincoln. He was somebody who was in there who was believed to be a Republican, and the president was trusting on that the man was a true Republican, but in truth he was the eyes and the ears and the spy for that of the Democrats. And the same holds true with Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson, of course, after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, would become the president. Andrew Johnson, during his period, he faced a lot of ridicule. He was the most criticized president ever. I'll include articles with this so you can look more into depth with it. The reason being that, like I said, he was a Democrat. He tried to undo everything that Lincoln did. And he was more in the pocket, though they claim, his life was threatening, this, that, and everything. And it probably was, because, the Democrats made it clear to anybody, if you betrayed them, they'd kill you. They were a terrorist organization. They had by this point here, they had a very well-established order of the Ku Klux Klan going around terrorizing and threatening people. And I would imagine that Andrew Johnson was not too far out of range as well. They will kill their own if they seek any kind of treason. They're like the Muslims, the Islamic Muslims. So so I'm just saying. One thing now too, I want to talk on during this time after Lincoln was assassinated, and we have Andrew Johnson who goes ahead and pardons all the Confederacy, even pardons Jefferson Davis, the president, Democratic president of the Confederate slave states, and allows them to come back into the House to vote, and allows them back into the Congress and our government. And this is how we wound up continuing on as a two-party system. Lincoln wanted to dissolve the party and take it back to, as we said in the previous, that of Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution, which guarantees to all a Republican form of government only. If you don't know that, you should look up Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution, do a little bit of due diligence on it, and understand that in America, only a Republican form of government is allowed. I want to touch on this real quick here with some amendments that were being made, and where we have to recognize as well higher education institutions and their role in what takes place. Out of the fear of the Democrats at this time, and when we're talking about here where we have Andrew Johnson as president now for a while, and they had the pardonings and this and that, when we look at today's modern legal dictionaries, we see master and servant law and legal definition. Master and servant is a term used to describe the legal relationship between an employer, master, and employee, servant, for the purpose of determining an employer's liability for acts of an employee. A master and servant relationship is determined by the base of amount of control the employer exercises over the service provided by the employee. A master, so just so you understand, these definitions were written after this point here by Merriam-Webster and all of them, by the pressure of the Democrats. They understood that with slavery being abolished, they still wanted master-servant kind of defined in relation to the new employee-employer kind of basis to be that of the master and servant relationship. This was taught in colleges, and the colleges were on board with it. The thing about what we have to understand as America as well is that a lot of British influence came into our nation from the higher education of learning in college. The Democrats were an elitist, snobbish people who, just like the British, felt they were better than everybody, like they had different classes of people, and they were considering themselves of the highest of elitist class of people, and that everybody in the world should be there to serve them. They were pretty much elitist scumbags is what they were. These kind of things were easily adapted into our teachings, and the Democrats were very good about putting this propaganda into teaching and setting up the role. And as we go forward, you're going to realize how aggressive they were in trying to establish the divisive nature of what they plan to do. And understand, it wasn't that they became very smart to doing these things overnight. The order of the Ku Klux Klan, like I said, is an ancient order, and these things have been in practice in the rise and falls of many nations throughout world history. And the practice of what they're doing is something with an alliance of that of their world allies. Like today we know the Democrats are allied with the totalitarian Islamic socialist Muslims, and as well that of the democratic democracies of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And they always have been allies, and these people are always and will always be our enemies. We know today, the mistake is being made by many. I'll include links to this so people can look up, or you can look up master-servant relationship in any legal dictionary, and you'll get the gist of what I'm saying. But I just wanted to put that started back in that time where they changed master, meaning like in Webster, if you look in 1861's dictionary, master was a slave owner. And then they changed master-servant relationship to meaning employer-employee. So understand, I'm just trying to educate you a little bit. Now, Andrew Johnson, as we say, he faced impeachment from all the way through 1868 as President of the United States. He threat of hanging several times for the acts of what many considered was his treason. I'll include links to this so you can look more in detail to that. During the time of all this going on, we as well were experiencing something, this is all important, of the industrialism of 1865 through the 1900s. We would have as we progress forward, we would have the completion of the railroad. Following Andrew Johnson, we would get Ulysses S. Grant. Now we would start to see the ugliness of the Democratic establishment moving forward after it's been readmitted to our government and allowed to continue, and we are still now a two-party system. We see the difference from the very start. Ulysses S. Grant was being threatened to be assassinated by the assassins of the Democrats. I think I have an article in here on it. But and then also too, I just would like to touch. This is in 1869 with Ulysses S. Grant. We also had in 1869 what I'm saying too, the evolution of the Democrats and how they evolved themselves to the terrorist organization in America today as the enemies within that they still are. In 1869, the Democrats formed the Knights of Labor Unions. This is where the unions formed in the United States. And why the Republicans don't agree with the unions is because we understood what the unions really were. The Democrats' Knights of Labor, though today they through propaganda try to make it sound like some humane and people-loving organization. In truth, that's a lie. And even by the end of this, you're going to find out that it's still the same Knights of Labor Union this very day that controls the labor unions under the Democratic Party. Those who are not complicit with this more or less get the shaft, kind of like what the oil industry unions just got right now with the pipelines. They're not somebody who was on board with the Knights Labor Union of the Democrats. That's why Joe Biden doesn't care about them. But anyway, we'll get back to what we're talking about here. The Knights Labor Union was a terrorist organization that was established by the Ku Klux Klan, where they took off the hoods and they put on suits, and they would go in and they would organize the employees of a company and, of course, just tell them what they wanted to hear and offer them the world to get their allegiance to that of the union. And then with the union, they would have the power now to be able to shut down production of whatever employer that they were targeting, because they could tell the employees, just go on strike, don't work, don't do this until they meet our demands. They were able to use this power to force the now industrial boom factories and what have you that were building up across the nation to hire that of Ku Klux Klan men as the foremen, who would then in turn hire that of the lower white common man of the Ku Klux Klan or the societies of Democrats, giving them the best of jobs and what have you, and disenfranchising that of the now free black Americans who were highly being sought after in the Industrial Revolution because they had very good work ethics. And being now that they were free, most people too don't realize there was a large, over 700,000 black Americans, even before the Civil War, were free in the 13 colony free state areas. Many of them didn't even, sadly, it's untrue too, most people don't understand, that many of the free black Americans, even before the Civil War, owned black slaves themselves. We don't talk about this, like today, this is Black History Month, and you have the issues going on now where you have many of the idiots of the black Americans looking for reparations and what have you. And they're not totally aware. They think they follow the propaganda of what was started in the early 1900s. And the truth really makes them look so foolish when you realize that, no joke, by the time of the approach in 1850 to the Civil War, 10 years or 11 years before the war, you can look this up, back in the consensus that was done on free blacks at the time in the United States and free whites in the United States, and which people don't realize, slavery was abroad all around the world, white and black. As I said, it was never a white and black issue, it was an inhumanity issue. There was twice as many white slaves in the world as there was black slaves in the world throughout the whole entire history of all slavery. And that's just a fact. So you had many of in 1850, in all honesty, the black minority, they were a minority in the new found nation of the United States developing, but there was, like I say, I think it was 700,000 free blacks during the 1850 census. And on average, each one of them owned between 1 and 5 black slaves themselves. And some of them, like the Ellison family, who I believe was out of North Carolina, he was one of the largest black African slaveholders in the whole new country. And on a marginal basis, blacks actually own more black slaves than whites owned slaves by 1850. This is the facts. If you want to look up the history, you'll see it. But the Knights Labor Union was trying to disenfranchise the free blacks out of the industrial boom. And they used this organization as a terrorist organization because and most of the businesses devolving were under the Republic of the Republican Party. Most of the Republicans were the businessmen who were leading the way in the industrial boom in America, and what the Democrats would come in and they would literally go and have their Klan members terrorize their home, what have you, until they complicitly complied with them, and they would give in and hire the foremans of the Ku Klux Klan, who would in turn hire that, and then the free black Americans would start to be disenfranchised. The Ku Klux Klan, right here, like it says, founded in 1865, the Ku Klux Klan extended into almost every southern state by 1870, and where we're approaching now in 1869. In 1869, like I said, the Klan had formed the Knights of Labor, unions, and this is where unions started to take effect. I just want to touch on that. Now, we have the issue now where we were back here and we were looking at Ulysses S. Grant. We see here that we have a unionist guy who is of the Democrats, who threatens to go and assassinate, wants to kill Grant, and this guy wound up eventually being sentenced to life in prison. He didn't succeed on it, and him along with others, they were actually conspirators along with this that were found to have even taken part in that of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So as we move forward right here, it says it was on April 13th and 14th with this guy here we're talking about, O'Laughlin, was with the intent to kill and murder. This was not proven, but there was no doubt O'Laughlin was a willing conspirator through late March. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. So this was what the terroristic extent of what the Democrats started to do with their Ku Klux Klan and how they started to target that of Republicans and threaten to kill many of the now white Republicans for aiding and helping that of the black, now free Americans. The organization. We had Rutherford B Hayes. Now, Hayes was a good guy. He dealt with the completion of the railroad. The industrial boom was still taking off. He had to end out with the Reconstruction. And he also, with the Reconstruction, what this was, by the time we get to Rutherford B. Hayes, he started pulling out the United States troops from different southern states. They were required, we did have the Reconstruction Act that went through. They had to swear an allegiance to the Constitution of the United States in order to get their right to vote back. Many, like I say, all the Confederate soldiers and what have you, they were pardoned and they were released back into society. They were allowed to vote again. Rutherford was the guy who, at the end there, he was the guy who started to do the breakdown of the Reconstruction, removing, because we had placed troops within the southern states to enforce that they not harm the black, now free black Americans, and that and also to help and assist in helping them find jobs, relocate to new homes, what have you. However, it was going to happen in a reconstruction of America now as a completely free nation, with slavery now being abolished. Following him, we would have James Garfield. Now, Garfield, we would see again the effects of that of the Democrats, because they would kill Garfield. They would hire assassins to kill him, Republicans here, and then we would realize too you had Chester Arthur after him, who was the vice president who took over until 1885. Following this, as you can see in this image, we would wind up with Grover Cleveland, the first Democrat since the Civil War to be elected, and this is a very controversial election because of what we've seen happen back here with Garfield being assassinated by the Democrats. Their Klan parties and what have you were doing an awful lot to threaten Republicans, and also now that they had, at this point here, they had taken a large control of the Industrial Revolution taking place within many of the factory jobs and what have you, and they were able to threaten many of these factory owners and the wealthy people who were leading the industrial boom. And with this power now of employees, what they started to do is use the union, as they still do today, the Democrats, to corrupt the elections by threatening those who now, you have the majority of the working class now in the northern regions, where the Democrats are now moving into control with their unions in the northern factory districts that were developing in New York, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. And with their Klan coming up that way now and their terroristic methods and threats, they would get a lot of their foremans in place. Now the foremans would start threatening a large voting base of population of the industrial boom of the factory workers that you have to vote Democrat or you're at risk of losing your job. Back in these times, the Democrats even would go as far to the extreme of making them actually show proof that they voted Democrat by, like, somehow They knew the guards at the voting stations. I mean, it was just the same as what it is with the Democrats today. The same complicit corruption that we see today with the Democrats was taking place all through since the Civil War and on forward. And this is a fact. But they, with the assassination here, too, these things became scary for many of the soft-skinned Republican business owners who were not the fighting spirit kind of people. The last of the fighting spirit kind of people we lost back when it comes down to where we see, like with these kind of men, Marcellus Cassius Clay, who didn't take no grunt from these Democrats. This guy here, they had several times they threatened to kill him, and he killed, literally hand killed several Democrats who tried to assassinate him. One, he cut the eyes out of him and threw them in a river. The other, he chased down 4 of them and beat each one of them to death. But by the point where we're at now in history, the Republicans start to become soft-skinned, coward-like people, more businessy, and no brawn. And that's the sad part. But though we still do have some strength within it, Chester Arthur was not no punk. He didn't take no gruff from the Democrats, and he held office. But when it came up time for Grover Cleveland's election was very controversy. And the reason I say it is the election was won by him through terrorist tactics of the Democrats. They were threatening literally tens of thousands of people with their jobs now in the factory industrial, controlling things with the labor unions. That's why Republicans don't like the labor unions, because we know the truth of it. They use the labor unions to disenfranchise the now free blacks out of the industrial area. They also used the Ku Klux Klan and Knights Labor Union, too, for those who did stay, to force them to force their families and their communities of the now free blacks to vote Democrat if they want to keep their jobs. They also control, because most of the blacks, many of the black free Americans now worked within the southern states still. That was where they were familiar with. They wanted to stay there, and they were in the farming industry. The Knights Union as well was affecting the farming. They established farmers unions, and they controlled the majority of the blacks now working, free blacks in the southern farming districts, and as well were forcing them by threats of terrorism or their job or their livelihood if they didn't vote Democrat. And they were maintaining very strong control in the southern states. It was the Democrats who would bring in the Jim Crow laws, the separate but equal, the segregation laws. They opposed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. They fought it like crazy, not wanting it. It passed by a majority of Republican rule. This is the thing I'm saying. Most people today aren't even aware of this truth in history on how racist and evil and terroristic the Democratic Party was throughout our history, and still are to this very day. Of what you're going to realize as we progress in history, these things never change. That's why we have this title, The Enemies Within, because they're always the enemies within. They've always been the enemies within, and they still are the very same enemies within this very day in the year 2021. But as we progress forward here now, we're going to get up to the point here. This talks about the assassination, and it was by Charles, I can't say this man's last name, Gutterloo, who had followed various professions in his life, but in 1880 determined to gain federal office by, having here, and I believe they had lost the position because he was, okay, this guy here, like I said, was a unionist thing that happened with the assassin guy, assassination of President James Garfield, and the guy who killed him, and then allowed for Chester Arthur to take over, which we're just going through. Then we get to Grover Cleveland. Now, Grover Cleveland here is an interesting thing that we have to understand, too. With Black History Month, this will be something you can maybe want to add to your Black history and realize that Black History Month shouldn't exist. It should just be American history, because all the propaganda, the lies they tell. Grover Cleveland would be a guy with the Democrats who would allow, again, now this is where the terrorist reign of the Ku Klux Klan starts to spread now. And the biggest mistake we made was allowing a Democrat to get into office again. This led, again, to an onslaught across the country. Once the Democrats had a president elected, which they were able to do by the terroristic acts, like I said, they hijacked the Industrial Revolution going on with that of their Knights of the Labor Unions. They had control of the farming districts with their farming Knights of the farming labor unions. And the terroristic acts of the Ku Klux Klan threatening people, they felt invincible at this time. And once Grover Cleveland was enacted, which you don't hear much from the Democrats about this, but Democrat Grover and Cleveland pretty much gave free rein to the Klan to do whatever they wanted. And any communities that were being assisted, where you had what was called integration communities of reputable white Republicans and that of moral, upstanding black free Americans, were unified in many communities, developing that of a working together community in business and employment and what have you. Many black communities and white communities were prospering, but this would stop under the Grover Cleveland administration. Like we say here, it says the worst year for whites was 1884, when 160 whites were lynched. For the blacks, the highest number of lynchings occurred in 1892, when 161 were lynched, so one more. So most people aren't aware. In your Black History Month this month, you might want to add that in to realize that it was, what about the white history? Because, you weren't the only ones being lynched, murdered, and killed by the racist Democrats. As we see here, during the time when we had the president here, Grover Cleveland, who allowed the Klan to go on a rampage. Those are the white Republicans who were aiding and assisting the blacks in accomplishing and setting up and establishing their life and doing all they could to help them build prospering and good communities, and they were coexisting together fine. All this was disrupted by the Democrats. And during that disruption, like we see here, they literally hunted down the white Republicans and were hanging them. No different than what we see with the terroristic ways they did things back with the great hanging of the Republicans in Gainesville, Texas, during the time of the Civil War, to reflect what they did to Southern Americans. There was no discrimination with the Ku Klux Klan or Democrats. And this is another thing that sets out to make the example of what I've been trying to say for a long time, how these things are really not about white and black. As we evolve in history, you'll understand where the racial issue was created by the Democrats, and it started becoming this narrative of white and black. At this time, it was not a white and black issue, and prior to this time, it was never a white and black issue, because most of the free blacks that lived in the free states of the colonies understood that in Great Britain, the majority of slaves were white slaves. So it was really not considered in that time a white and black issue, even among that of white and black Americans. The only people who had a white and black racial profile issue was that of the Democrats and their allies, the Islamic Muslims. The Islamic Muslims, as I said in prior videos, they were the founders of the black African slave trade. And the so-called Prophet of Islam was actually the founder of black and white racism. If you read in the Christian Bibles or the Jewish canons of the Jewish Bibles and books, you'd never see anything like I mentioned this before in other videos. Today, a lot of people who are in the racist train debate about, is Jesus a white man or a black man? Well, we really don't know, because the Bible doesn't say. You see what I'm saying? Now, Jesus was 2,000 years ago. Islam emerges on the earth 1,400 years ago. Prior to Islam, nowhere in the Bible do we ever see anything mentioned about the color of people's skin. God just, and that of the prophets and that of people, never distinguished the difference between people. It was like common sense that all humanity is one people of all equal, created by God, until Islam emerges. And then Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, when we see the writings about him, is where we realize that, he distinguishes people between being white and black. And this is the first time we see in any kind of a religious tree a mentioning of races or distinguishing between people's skin color. Starts with the Mohammedans or the Islamic Muslims back in 640 AD. And then from there forward, the Democrats were on board with that racial issue as well. These things as well were still tactics used, a method of divisiveness by tribes prior, tribes and names of family names and what you called back then. I had another name for it. Can't remember right now. Kind of like tribes, but I can't remember it right now. But it was a name they used for things that would, how they would divide people back then, for the divide and conquer method of ancient practices. It got led into races with that of the Islamic Muslims and carried forward, and the racist Democrats of the United States of America, of the British Tories when they formed it, they followed that ancient order, of which would have been established through the ancient order of the Ku Klux Klan. They would have known about this because it was a method that was still employed by that of many of the kingdoms in Great Britain and around the world, with the totalitarian emperors and what have you of the demigods. So at that time. But I just wanted to point out here, the worst year for the white Republican, was in 1884 upon the election of Grover Cleveland, Democrat, because he gave free reign for the Klan to go, and the Klan started lynching that of white Republicans who were aiding and assisting or working with that of the now free blacks and helping them build prospering communities and what have you across the United States. And as you can see here, this makes the point to put out. This is about the lynching in America. Many whites were lynched for fighting racism. Might want to include that and see how that fits with your Black History Month. It doesn't work out too well with all your racial crying. And I don't mean to sound sarcastic, but I have to be sarcastic. It's idiocy, this black and white stuff with this black history and all the blacks talking about slavery. And I mean, let me tell you something. If you know anything of the truth of history, you know the whole racial thing is just a lie. Okay, slavery was an inhumanity issue. There was twice as many white slaves. You don't see white people running around wanting all this stupid stuff and causing all this division, what have you. But understand as well, the majority of that of the black Americans here are still under the control of the Democrats. As we progress forward, we'll see how that happens. It's kind of amazing to realize that the history we're looking at right now, and then realize today that the majority of blacks support the Democratic Party. Boom, mind-blowing. But we'll get to how that all evolves as we go through history. As we progress forward here, we see this article today. And this is something I want to put into effect so people understand why the Knights of Labor still matter. This is an article written today. And in this article included, you can get an idea of kind of what's going on with the energy industry and how even with the unions, you have these despicable lawyers who, of course, see the money and the potential to sit on their fat, worthless, you know what, because that's about all they are for the majority. I mean, I'm not saying all. I know some good lawyers that it's not that they're successful in life because they're lawyers. That's just the path they chose. They became lawyers, but they have incredible common sense and reasoning, and they're very smart business people. Those people, there's a lot of them really, really good people, and there's some really good lawyers that are doing real good just work out there for children and families and such like that. And their title as lawyer does not match that of the scumbag lawyer I'm talking about, which makes up the majority of attorneys in this country, especially when you get in the Democrats or you get in the unionist lawyers. These people are just self-serving, despicable, evil, disgusting examples of humanity. And of course, as you see here, knowing the history of where the Knights Labor Union, what the labor unions were established for, you still have capitalist people who will go in and form unions just to be able to have something where they can sit on their butt and rob all these employees of their dues and what have you, and as well get, a lot of money, so they take a percentage of everything they collect to donate to the Democratic Party and what have you, or even a Republican Party. Some now we have Republicanism that's supporting the unions in some sense, which is totally idiocy today that we have Republicans supporting unions. Just blows my mind because obviously these people today are idiots, paper brain idiots that don't know the history that we're trying to review right now. But this is where we're at now. So we're up to the point here of 1884, and that was about what I was planning on doing up from that point there in a brief overview. I don't know how long we've been going here. I don't want to go over too long a time. I'm trying to keep these shorter because I get people complaining my videos are too long. But to recap real quick, and what I say, when we look, we're going to leave off here. Grover Cleveland would be the first Democrat who would get elected since the Civil War. We would start to see the mistake we make with that election with him right quick when we realize that he unleashes the Ku Klux Klan to go running. As we move down, we see Grover Cleveland. Then we see Benjamin Harrison, who was elected in 1888. Then we see Grover Cleveland again. And this is because, like I say, at this part here is where we start to see the Republican Party of a mass majority across the nation. Now, the black free Americans started to become very tough. They really had no choice. They were always under ridicule and attack by the Democrats. And you always they had to be tough-skinned. But the Republicans, for the majority, became the backbone of the Industrial Revolution and business evolution in our country as we were growing. They became soft-skinned business people and were very easily intimidated, and the Democrats capitalized on this cowardness of many of the Republicans. Many Republicans were not, like I say, they were not, by this point here, they start losing the spirit of willing to die for their nation. A lot of them took to the pole of, feeling helpless and being able to do anything against the Democratic terrorist organization that was developing, and they would just comply and do what they would do for their own self-serving interests, of which even today in the year 2021, we realize there's a lot of Republicans who are just like that. They're not true Republicans. And when I say true Republicans, I mean they're not the true founding principle republic of that of 1792, of that party that was founded by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Though in 2021 today, I got to admit, I'm kind of agreeing more with George Washington that we should have no political parties in this country because in deeper research with that, which we'll touch on as we progress forward, and we revisit things of what we should consider on changes we can make in our nation today to get us going more on track to what our founders wanted. But we're going to leave off right here now with that. That's a brief review of almost from 1861 to 1884. So we're looking at 24-year review in brief detail. I'll include links to this stuff here and everything I have so that people can do their own due diligence because, I'm trying to shorten the video so people pay more attention. The links that'll be included will include something where people can do all their own reading and due diligence and indulge as deep as you want, which I encourage everybody, indulge as deeply as you can. As an American, everyone's responsibility to know their history. We're a government of the people, for the people, by the people. As the American people, we are born with the obligation to maintain and secure this nation for that of our posterity, which are our children, our grandchildren, that of the future Americans. Preserving that posterity means we have to preserve the conservative values of which this nation was founded upon. Our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence are documents which are timeless. They are not documents that expire or somehow no longer fit into that of humanity, because these are documents of humanity. They cover that of a basis of principles of humanity within the moral ethics values of what is self-evident within the laws of nature, which don't change. These things don't change. They're self-evident to be of what they are. So understand that the Declaration of Independence in our United States Constitution was drafted on those founding principles, and they are timeless documents. They don't change. They can be amended, to be ratified, to be made stronger. We can recognize weaknesses within them and strengthen them, such as that. But the documents itself should never be considered a document that is outdated. You cannot outdate something of the self-evident of the laws of nature within humanity. That's a natural constant. That's a natural constant. So that's something I'm going to leave off with on that basis right there. And then as well, like I say here, we understand this why Knights of Labor still plays a matter today is in relation to what we're seeing happening right now. This right here will give you an example of what we see going on, because a lot of people right now are like, I don't understand. If the Democrats are for the union, why would they fire all these union pipe fitters? Why would they fire all these union? Well, you understand some unions today, like I said, have been formed by that of following the example, for that of capitalism, for the gain of the money, by fat, lazy, worthless, disgusting, inhumane lawyers. And they're partly of that of the Republican establishment. And, they're just in it for the money. And the Democrats are not going to stay loyal to their unions. And their unions make up that of mostly the labor forces of like pipe fitters and such like that within the energy sector, because that's a no-no sector for the Democrat, the liberal Democrat. They want to save the world. That's why now they have all these electric cars. Though, the people with the electric cars pay no attention to the large diesel generators that are running the chargers that charge their cars while they're there charging. It's just idiocy we're seeing. But anyway, I'll include links to all this stuff here. So just so you know, we'll do a quick review again. We review everything from the forming of the Confederacy by the Democratic Party. Little bit, very important fellow, I think, Cassius Marcellus Clay. The birthplace of him and how he was the ambassador to Russia. How Russia guaranteed a Union victory, because Russia was our ally in the Civil War. They prevented Great Britain and France from coming in and allied in the Democratic Party's Confederate slave states. A reflection back on that of the fact that understand all these Southern people who try to claim that the Confederacy and the Confederate flag is their Southern heritage. This is a lie. The propagated. As we are moving forward now, going into the next segment of history, we'll be going forward, getting to the point where the propagation of all these things happened. Understand during the time after the Civil War, nobody in America of America heritage believed anything of what we see today. There was no Confederate flags being allowed to be flown back then. There was no Confederate monuments. There was no tributes paid to Confederate soldiers. They were known for exactly what they were. The Democrats were known as the treasonous traitors within. They were treasonous traitors who tried to overthrow the nation in 1861. They caused the Civil War trying to overthrow the nation. They were traitors. They still are the same traitors. And we're going to realize as we progress forward in history, just like the 1400 year of the Islamic Muslims or the 7,000 year of that of the totalitarian rulers of China, things don't change with these people. Their agenda is still the same. Their ideology is still the same. Who they are is still the same. They just keep masking it under different names and different forms. The same like the British Tory were able to mask who they were by changing themselves from being the British, known as the British Tory, or the British Loyalists, they were the Tory, to being the Democrats. You see, that's how they now, pretty much, they just changed the name, but they stayed the same people. They had the same values, same principles as the Tory. They were just now known, and in 1828, when they formed the Democratic Party, they just became the Democrats. But because by that point, they couldn't hide. Anybody who was a Tory was going to be tarred, feathered, possibly shot and killed, because the true patriot Americans had it with them. So by changing the name to Democrat, kind of like left... they didn't know if it was a Southern American or if it was a true Tory. You really couldn't tell the difference between them until the Civil War emerged. And then we realize during the Civil War that like I say, we recognize what they were doing to that of true Americans with the, like I say, the great hanging in Gainesville, Texas that took place. These that were real Americans, and that's what I mean when they became the Democrats. Many of these in the South, by just out of fear of trying to avoid conflict with the Democratic Tories, became Democrats, and then you would have the Northern or the Republicans come in that area, and they would say, well, they're Democrats, but then they would have to separate between who was a Tory Democrat and who was an American Democrat. It was hard to separate. But during the Civil War, we were able to tell who was who because the Confederate or the true Democrats pretty much were going around hanging all the true American Republicans that were down in the Southern District. So this is what they did to true Southern. I just want people to get this straight and understand that the Confederate flag does not represent anything of America. We touched on here the House divided speech, and we touched on the ending of the Civil War, the 16-month it took, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan by the Democratic Party, the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the Wade Davis bill for an attempt at Reconstruction to abolish the Democratic Party, which didn't happen because, as we know, they killed Abraham Lincoln. Some of the early indoctrinations, that's what was the purpose of this master-servant thing in the dictionary, was to show how the Democrats quickly started to maneuver and to manipulate that of even education, to start indoctrinating that of master-servant things for the way they wanted things to keep with their racial agenda and divisive nature of slavery and what have you. Understand that in this too, by the new form of it, by the Democrats being elitist scumbags they were, the servants would be that of anyone free now, white or black, that works as an employee. These were all things incorporated with that in the hopes of what they planned on doing with their labor unions, with the Knights of the Labor Unions going forward. But like we say, the Wade Davis bill got pocket vetoed, but and then of course it went forward with how it was going to go under Andrew Johnson, who changed the whole Reconstruction phase and everything and how it was going to go by when he faced his what have you with impeachments. We touched on all this, so I'm going to end it with that. I'll include links to all this stuff here. I hope people enjoyed this video going forward. I'm doing things a little more brief, and I'll just include a lot of literature so you can do the in-depth study on it. I'm just going to give these things are trying to cover the important issues of what we need to consider as we move forward. This history all plays an important role of who we are today. And it also plays an incredible role of understanding the divisive nature of what we're facing today that is placing our very republic at threat right now of falling. And I just wanted to touch on, and as well it paints the truer picture of understanding who the Democrats are and who the Republicans are and what the true intent of American founding principles are. So with that said, I'm going to end it here. And like I said, I would include links below in the description of everything that we reviewed. And people can go and indulge into as deep as they want in their own due diligence to learn as much as they want, and I encourage you to learn everything. So with that said, thank you all. I hope you enjoyed my video. Anybody has comments, you can comment below. Anybody wants to add anything, add it in the comments below. Good conversation, debating can happen below. If you want to see something in another video or you want me to bring up something in more detail from this video that we want to review, let's do that, because we can do these segments where we do these periods of 10, 20 years in history and then do a review over what people may be curious about to the facts of these things. With your own due diligence, you may have further questions, and we'll broadly more, hopefully our posterity will review these videos at one point and learn the truth of American history and the values and principles of true Americanism. So with that said, thank you all again for watching my video, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a great day.